I knew something was wrong before I even pulled into my driveway. You ever get that feeling where your stomach drops for no reason, like your brain notices something before your eyes catch up to it? Yeah, that kind of feeling. I'd been gone 4 days. Just a short fishing trip up near Lake Martin with 2 old buddies from my Air Force days. Nothing fancy. Just beer, cheap burgers, and pretending our knees didn't hurt every morning. The second I turned onto Briarwood Lane, though, I saw pieces of black plastic glittering in the afternoon sun near my garage, and my first thought was honestly, great, teenagers. Then I got closer and realized those weren't random scraps. They were my cameras. All 6 of them. Torn down, smashed apart, wires hanging out like somebody ripped veins out of a body. One of them still had part of the mounting bracket attached, swinging in the wind against my siding with this hollow little clink, clink, clink sound that instantly pissed me off more than it probably should have. I just sat there in the truck for a second staring at it. Engine running, hands still on the wheel. Those cameras weren't cheap. More importantly, they mattered. Last winter, they caught a guy trying to pry open my shed at 2 in the morning. Couple months before that, they recorded some idiots checking car doors up and down the street. The sheriff actually used footage from my driveway to identify one of them. Around here, people acted like crime didn't exist because the houses were expensive and the lawns looked like golf courses, but bad stuff still happened. Always does. And maybe I took security more seriously than most, because when you spend 12 years in the military, your brain never fully stops scanning for exits and worst-case scenarios. I got out of the truck and found a bright orange notice taped where my front porch camera used to be. Big bold letters right at the top. Community Compliance Enforcement Action. I remember laughing when I read it because at first I genuinely thought it was fake, like some neighborhood prank. Then I saw the signature at the bottom. Heather Holloway, president of the Maple Glen Residential Board. That's when the confusion turned into anger. See, here's the thing nobody seems to understand about my property. I don't live in Maple Glen. Technically, my house sits right outside the subdivision on an older stretch of land that belonged to my grandfather before developers swallowed everything around it 20 years ago. They built giant stone entrances, fancy fountains, all these identical beige houses with fake shutters and names like the Charleston or the Magnolia. Meanwhile, my place just sat there in the corner like an old stubborn dog refusing to move. I liked it that way. No HOA fees. No permission slips to paint my mailbox. No meetings about acceptable shrub height. But apparently, over the years, certain people in Maple Glen started treating my property like an inconvenience they couldn't control. And nobody embodied that more than Heather Holloway. Heather was one of those women who smiled without warmth. Perfect white teeth, expensive tennis outfits, always smelled vaguely like lemon perfume and passive aggression. About 6 months earlier, she'd stopped by complaining that my oak trees dropped too many leaves near the subdivision entrance. Before that, she complained about my workshop because somebody heard power tools during brunch hours. Brunch hours. I swear to God she actually said that. So when I saw her signature on that notice, I already knew this wasn't about privacy. It was about control. I called the number listed on the paper while standing right there beside my broken cameras. Heather answered on the second ring, sounding weirdly cheerful. "Mr. Grayson, welcome home," she said, like she'd been expecting the call. "You had my property damaged," I told her. No hello. No small talk. Just straight into it, because I was already running hot. "Your surveillance devices were removed following multiple resident complaints," she replied calmly. "They violated community privacy standards." I looked around my yard while she said it, trying to understand how somebody could lie so confidently. My cameras pointed at my driveway and my porch. Residents reported feeling monitored. Residents shouldn't trespass near my porch then. That got a little silence out of her. Just a tiny pause, but enough. Then her voice changed, colder now. "Mr. Grayson, communities like ours function on mutual trust. Cameras create hostility." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was insane. You tore down 6 legally installed cameras from property you don't even govern, and I'm the hostile one? She ignored that completely. The devices were disposed of this morning. That part hit different. Something in me just went still. Disposed. Electronic waste protocols were followed. $3,000. Gone. Thrown away because a woman with too much time and too much authority decided she didn't like being seen while driving past my house every day. I wish I could tell you I handled that call calmly, but I didn't. I said some things I probably shouldn't repeat on YouTube, and she hung up on me halfway through. After that, I spent the rest of the evening collecting broken pieces of my cameras from the grass, while the sun went down over Maple Glen's perfectly trimmed little kingdom. And somewhere during all that, while holding a shattered lens in my hand, I started realizing something. Maybe visible security had been my first mistake. That night, I barely slept. Not because of the money. Honestly, $3,000 hurt. Sure, but I've lost more than that before. What kept crawling around in my head was the arrogance of it. The certainty. Heather hadn't sounded nervous on the phone. She sounded comfortable, like somebody who'd spent years getting away with crossing lines because nobody ever pushed back hard enough. And the more I thought about it, the more little moments from the past couple years started clicking together in my brain. The complaints about my truck being visually disruptive. The letter about my American flagpole supposedly being too tall for neighborhood harmony. One time, I even caught one of their landscaping crews trimming bushes 6 feet onto my property line because they wanted the entrance road to look symmetrical. Every single thing came from the same place. People who confused money with authority. Around 2 in the morning, I was sitting in my kitchen drinking terrible coffee and staring out the window toward Maple Glen's entrance when my nephew Caleb texted me out of nowhere. "You awake?" Caleb worked cybersecurity out in Austin. Kid was scary smart, the kind of guy who could explain network encryption while eating Taco Bell at midnight. I told him what happened, and 10 minutes later, he called me laughing so hard he could barely talk. "Uncle Dean," he said, "please tell me you didn't immediately threaten anybody." Depends how you define threaten. That means yes. I could hear keyboard clicks in the background while he talked. Okay, listen. If they're going to play the privacy card, cameras are actually the worst hill to die on. I'm listening. Then his tone shifted into that dangerous calm smart people get right before they suggest something that changes everything. Motion mapping. What the hell is motion mapping? Tiny wireless sensors. Legal. Cheap. Nearly invisible. No video, no audio, just movement data. You can track patterns across an entire property without recording a single image. I leaned back in my chair. And that's legal? Public movement in public-facing areas? Absolutely. Then he paused. You want to make these people paranoid? I smiled for the first time all day. A little. Caleb drove down that weekend in this beat-up silver Tacoma that sounded like a lawn mower having a panic attack. He brought 2 duffel bags full of equipment and enough energy drinks to stop a horse's heart. Watching him work was honestly impressive. The sensors were tiny, about the size of a matchbox, and he painted each one to blend into wherever it was going. Fence posts, tree bark, under gutter edges, behind decorative rocks. If you weren't looking for them, you'd never see them. By Sunday evening, we had 43 sensors spread around my property. Driveway, barn, tool shed, side fence, mailbox area. But Caleb being Caleb, he also thought beyond the obvious. Technically, he said while adjusting one near the edge of my front ditch, this easement counts as public access. Meaning anybody crossing here creates movement data. Then he grinned, including your little HOA royalty. Now, I need to explain something important here because people always assume revenge stories happen fast. Real life doesn't work that way. Most of the time, revenge is boring at first. It's spreadsheets, patience, waiting. The first few days, all I got were constant alerts. Joggers, dog walkers, delivery trucks, teenagers cutting through the corner lot after dark. My phone buzzed so often I almost turned the system off. Then patterns started appearing. Every morning around 6:12, a guy in neon running shorts passed the entrance twice. Around 11 p.m., a teenager on a skateboard crossed near my side fence. Every Thursday, same UPS driver, same route, same timing. Human beings are creatures of habit, and once you start seeing movement as data instead of random activity, it gets weirdly fascinating. Then came Heather. Tuesday night. 1:47 a.m. motion alert near the front lawn. I checked the live map on my phone expecting raccoons or maybe deer. Instead, there she was stumbling across the edge of my property wearing yoga pants and carrying one high heel in her hand, while her golden retriever wandered ahead of her like it had given up on life. She was drunk. Like really drunk. She stopped halfway across my lawn and just stood there swaying under the streetlight before whisper yelling, "Cooper, move your furry ass." I nearly spit bourbon across my kitchen counter laughing. The woman who gave speeches about community values was cutting across my yard drunk at 2 in the morning because she didn't want to walk the extra 50 feet around the sidewalk curve. But honestly, Heather wasn't even the interesting one. 3 days later, sensor activity near the Patterson driveway triggered at 11:23 p.m. Jim Patterson was on the HOA board, retired dentist, drove a pearl white Tesla, and wore pastel sweaters tied around his shoulders like he was auditioning for a yacht commercial. According to neighborhood gossip, he and his wife had the perfect marriage. What my sensors picked up was 27 minutes of pacing movement in their driveway, followed by sudden aggressive motion spikes. I stepped outside onto my porch and could actually hear them yelling from 2 houses away. "You embarrass me everywhere we go," his wife screamed. Then him shouting back something about her spending habits before a car door slammed hard enough to echo down the block. Again, no cameras, no audio recordings, just movement logs and timestamps. But people reveal plenty without realizing it. The weirdest one, though, the one that changed how I looked at the whole neighborhood, was Allison Burke. Allison lived near the subdivision entrance in one of those giant white houses with black shutters everybody copies from Pinterest now. Early 40s maybe. Always waved politely when she drove by. Every Friday night around 10:40, my sensors started detecting repeated movement near the walking trail behind my property. Same timing, same route. At first I assumed she exercised late. Then one Friday, I happened to be sitting on my back porch when a black pickup rolled up near the trail entrance with its headlights off. Allison came walking out 5 minutes later wearing a hoodie and baseball cap, like she was in some low-budget spy movie. She climbed into the passenger seat, and they drove off. Around 1 a.m., the truck came back. She got out laughing about something, touched the driver's arm, then walked home through the dark like she'd done it 100 times. Monday morning, I saw her husband washing their SUV in the driveway while she stood beside him, smiling like a Christmas card. That bothered me more than I expected. Not because of the affair. Lord knows marriages are complicated. It bothered me because Maple Glen sold this image of perfection so aggressively that everybody living there seemed trapped inside characters they created for each other. Perfect lawns, perfect families, perfect morals. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, everybody was exhausted. Everybody was hiding something. And somehow I became the villain because I installed cameras in a neighborhood already built on performance. About 2 weeks after the sensors went live, things started getting interesting. Cars slowed down near my house more often. Conversations stopped when I walked into the local diner. One afternoon, I caught 2 Maple Glen residents standing near my mailbox staring into the trees like they expected hidden FBI equipment. Caleb thought it was hilarious. "You turned the whole subdivision into conspiracy theorists," he said. But underneath the humor, tension was building. You could feel it, like static electricity before a storm. Then one rainy Thursday evening, there was a knock at my front door. And standing there, soaked from the shoulders down, was Heather Holloway. Except this time she didn't look confident at all. I opened the door, and for a second neither of us said anything. Rain hammered against the porch roof, water dripping off the edge in sheets, and Heather just stood there clutching this little leather folder against her chest like it was body armor. Funny thing was, 2 weeks earlier she probably would have walked onto my porch like she owned the place. Now she looked like somebody approaching a bear trap. "You gonna invite me in?" she finally asked. I leaned against the doorframe. "Depends. You here to confiscate my refrigerator too?" That got the smallest little eye twitch out of her. Not a smile. Heather Holloway probably hadn't genuinely smiled since the Clinton administration, but close enough. I stepped aside and let her in. She walked through my house slowly, looking around like she'd never actually imagined me as a real person before. People in Maple Glen always treated my place like background scenery. The old corner property. The stubborn guy outside the HOA. They never pictured a life happening in here. Family photos on the shelves. My late wife's cookbooks still stacked near the kitchen. Old military plaques in the hallway. Heather noticed all of it, and for the first time since I met her, she seemed uncomfortable in a human way instead of an angry way. I made coffee. Not because I wanted to be polite, honestly, but because nervous people talk more when their hands are occupied. We sat at the kitchen table while rain rattled the windows. Finally, she cleared her throat. "Residents have concerns." I almost laughed. There it is. Dean. No, seriously, I missed that line. Felt weird not hearing it this week. She ignored that. People feel like they're being watched. I took a slow sip of coffee, and let the silence stretch just enough to make her squirm. "That's troubling," I said finally. "Maybe they should install cameras." Her jaw tightened instantly. "You know what you're doing. Securing my property? Creating fear." I leaned forward a little then. Not angry, not loud. Honestly calmer than I'd been since this whole thing started. "Heather, you tore surveillance equipment off my home because your residents claimed they felt uncomfortable. Now suddenly discomfort matters." She looked away first. That's how I knew the balance had shifted. People like Heather survive on social pressure. Confidence. The illusion that everybody quietly agrees with them. Once that illusion cracks, they panic. "The board may have acted too aggressively," she admitted carefully. "May have. Fine. We crossed a line." There it was. Not a full apology yet, but close. I let her sit in that moment for a second before asking the question I'd been wondering about since day one. "Why did my cameras really bother you?" She hesitated too long. And that told me everything. "Heather." She sighed hard and rubbed her temples. Suddenly she looked older. Tired. "Because people complained every single week," she muttered. "About what?" "About being seen." "Seen doing what?" Another silence. Then she laughed once, bitter and humorless. "You really want the truth?" That'd be refreshing. She stared into her coffee before answering. "Maple Glen runs on appearances. Property values, reputation, image, that's what everybody protects around here. Your cameras made people nervous because they reminded them they weren't as invisible as they pretended to be. And there it was. Not privacy, not safety, exposure. These people didn't hate surveillance. They hated accountability. Heather admitted residents had spent months complaining anytime my cameras caught arguments, late-night drinking, kids vandalizing mailboxes, married people showing up where they shouldn't be. Nothing criminal, mostly just messy human behavior. But in a neighborhood obsessed with perfection, even ordinary flaws felt dangerous. "So you destroyed my property because your community was embarrassed?" She didn't answer directly. Didn't need to. A week later, the HOA held an emergency board meeting. Caleb somehow got hold of the agenda beforehand and framed it like we were preparing for a hostage negotiation. Operation Suburban Meltdown, he called it. I swear that kid enjoys chaos way too much. The meeting took place in Maple Glen's clubhouse, this giant fake luxury building with stone columns and chandeliers that looked like upside-down wedding cakes. Half the neighborhood showed up. Some angry, some curious, some probably just desperate for entertainment. Heather sat at the front beside the board looking like she hadn't slept in days. Jim Patterson avoided eye contact with basically everybody. Allison Burke sat stiff as a statue 3 rows back, while her husband smiled cluelessly beside her. And me? I just sat quietly near the coffee station drinking stale decaf like I belonged there. Heather opened the meeting with this long speech about community trust and mutual respect, but the room already felt different. Nervous. Fractured. Then came the real announcement. The HOA would formally reimburse me for all destroyed equipment. They would issue written acknowledgement that my property existed outside HOA authority. They would also formally prohibit board members from entering or altering private property beyond subdivision boundaries ever again. You could literally hear whispers ripple across the room. Some residents looked shocked. Others looked relieved. One older guy near the back actually muttered, "About damn time." But the best moment, the absolute best moment, came right near the end. A woman stood up and asked the question everybody had been dancing around for weeks. "Are we actually being monitored?" Whole room went quiet. Heather looked at me. I looked back at her. Then I smiled and said, "Only if you're somewhere public." I have never seen 50 suburban people sit so stiff so fast in my entire life. After the meeting, residents poured into the parking lot arguing in little clusters under the streetlights. Some thought I'd gone too far. Others thought the HOA deserved worse. A couple people even approached me privately asking Caleb about installing sensor systems on their own homes. That part made me laugh harder than anything else. The same neighborhood that declared cameras hostile suddenly wanted upgraded security packages. Human beings are funny that way. We hate control until we think it protects us. About a month later, my new camera system got installed. Better resolution, wider coverage, fully paid for by Maple Glen's HOA settlement fund. Caleb helped integrate the motion sensors into the new setup, though we scaled back the public mapping after things cooled down. Mostly. Truth is, I still keep a few sensors active near the entrance road. Old habits die hard. Sometimes late at night, I sit on the porch with a beer and watch headlights roll through Maple Glen's gates while the sensors quietly blink on my phone beside me. And every now and then, I think about how badly this whole thing could have gone if somebody had just respected a simple boundary from the start. But maybe that's the real problem with places built on appearances. Eventually, somebody notices the cracks. So now I'm curious, if your neighbors illegally removed your security system because it made them uncomfortable, would you have fought back like I did? Or would you have let it go to keep the peace? And be honest, because communities like Maple Glen exist all over America, and sooner or later, everybody has to decide how much control they're willing to hand over just to belong.